everyone, it's Jake and Jake's Metal Chat. Hope you're all well, and welcome to episode 64 of my Metal Vault, where I will be exploring and showing you my favourite albums within heavy metal to thrash metal to death metal, black metal, doom metal, sludge metal, folk metal, you name it. All of that excellent stuff, as well as talking about the albums. I will also be talking about the band, so a brief history and any releases leading up to the album that I have picked. And I got to see these guys very recently, uh, last week, and I haven't seen these guys live for such a long time. A friend of mine, she gave me her ticket for free because she wasn't going in the end, and I'm glad I went. And I wasn't really feeling up to going to a gig that night, but then I thought, well, I haven't seen these guys in such a long time, and I'm glad I went because still got it all these years later, and I am talking about Nile. And first time I saw these guys was 2012 at Bloodstock, and I met them afterwards. I got a little big postcard signed by all of them, which of course is somewhere. I got a lot of that stuff still in boxes and stuff. And yeah, first time I ever heard these guys, it was around 2000 and I want to say 2006, maybe 2007, and just been hooked ever since. And for this episode, I got my favorite album by them, one of my all-time favorites by them, and it might be a lot of you guys out there, your favorite as well. So once again, this is Nile, and this is their 2000 release, Black Seeds of Vengeance. And what an album this is, released on the 5th of September 2000. So it's 24 years old. 24 years. And of course, let's get the booklet out, because obviously the case will glare on the light of my webcam. But yeah, here we are. The artwork. One of my favorite logos there. Got the snake, the spear, the Egyptian head. Of course, as you know, a lot of their lyrical themes are to do with ancient Egypt. And I mean, I love it. And I know a lot of you guys out there do as well. And here's some lyrics. And there's no band picture when I looked. I will show you some more lyrics here. And of course, let's get the CD out before I start talking about the band, because it's really cool design here. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And of course, the inside of who played on the album. Yeah, let's talk about Nile. For those not familiar, they formed in 1993 in Greenville, South Carolina. Yep, been a band for 31 years now. And of course, lyrical themes are ancient Egyptian mythology and history, death rituals, and they also got that bit of Lovecraft in there as well. Of course, the band was formed by Carl Sanders, who is the only original member left in the band. He was in a thrash metal band from 1983 to 1993 called Moash, I think that's how you pronounce it. And they only did one demo called Let the Sword Descend, which this band that Carl was in shared a stage with Morbid Angel and got pretty much hooked on to death metal, hence why Nile was formed. And man, just still bringing it today. And of course, let's get on to the demos. The first one is a self-titled demo from 1994, independently released. And the lineup on that was obviously Carl Sanders. We got Chief Spears, or Chef Spears, I think that's how it's pronounced, or Chief Spears. And of course, one of the original members of the band was on doing bass for Black for the album here, Black Seeds of Vengeance, as well as their debut, as well as their first EP from 1995, which we will get onto in a minute. And of course, Pete, who was the original drummer and was obviously on the debut as well as the second album for track number 10, and obviously the EP and the other demo. So those that's the original lineup of the band there. So we get on to their EP from 1995, Festivals of Atonement, which was on Anubis Records, which I don't think is going anymore. No longer going, but we're based in Greenville. And of course, released everything by Nile. Very fitting that they're on a label named after the god of death. Because obviously, like I said, all the lyrics are to do with ancient Egyptian history and mythology. And this EP only had 6 tracks overall. Still the original lineup there. And getting on to the next lot of releases. If we can get back onto the page here. Here we go. We have, of course, their second demo from 1996 called Ramesses, Bringer of War. Again, but then this time they had John join on guitars. And of course, this was the only album, the only release for him to be on. Still released by Anubis Records. This was 19th of November 1996. Festivals of Atonement was 10th of February 1995. And then that brings us to their debut. Amongst the catacombs of, I'm not going to try and say it, Nafren Kai. I think I just butchered that completely. And that was when they joined Relapse Records and released this album. And then released a compilation called In the Beginning. So that'd be demos, the EPs, with the lineup that we still know. And of course, John was gone at this point after the second demo, because he was not on the first album. And then we get on to their second album from 2000, of course, Black Seeds of Vengeance, 5th of September 2000. And this was the first album to feature Dallas Toller Wade, who was in the band from 1997 to 2017. So he was in the band for 20 years. And was pretty much on every single release up until What Should Not Be Unearthed was the last release he was on. But him and Cole's vocals on this album and throughout the other albums, and as well as live shows when I got to see them with Dallas, bounce off each other very well. He's now in a new band called Neurotic Wasteland, which I will be checking out very soon. So this has 10 tracks, but before we get on to the songs, let's get on to who else was on this album. Various amount of guests on here, one of them being Ross Dolan of Immolation and Derek Roddy, who has been in countless bands, and I actually got to see him perform live. But let's talk about the bands he was in before. So we had Hate Eternal, he was in Mevlit Creation, just to name a couple there, as well as live, Nada Sadak. He is still currently the drummer now, and I saw him when they played over in Slovakia, and then again at Bristol Death Fest in 2017. Excellent drummer, always knows, just an absolute beast of a drummer. One of my favorites. Gary Jones, I think that's a name. No, I thought that was someone that I knew from there, but I think most of these guys would have been friends of theirs. Like, do you want to do this? And they got a bunch. So other guest musicians would be obviously Gary Jones, Scott Wilson, Bob Moore, who has done countless different bands, Luster Decay, Latris Nocturne, Nile, of course, countless other bands as well, music stuff wise. Boz Porter, of course, the guest vocals on track number 3, which we will be getting to in a minute, as well as who was the guests on here, because there's a very amounts of guests on here. Mustafa was the Argol. Argol. I'm not sure how you say that, and I think that is an instrument. Um, on which I'm going to look up very briefly. Or I'm not sure what that's supposed to be, but one of many. And of course, we have. What else do we have? I'm not going to try and say this one's name, but obviously we get a lot of different like elements to it. So there's one that does a lot of chanting, so that's Mohammed, who does chanting on track 12. But yeah, this album, being heavy, brutal, and in your face, has a lot of ambient overtones, and just a very heavy, dark album. So Carl Sanders did produce this album. He's produced other albums as well. There's a lot of it being his own stuff, which is more on the ambient, yeah, Middle Eastern Egyptian ambient style. Obviously, doing guitar, bass, drums, other percussions, keyboards, and a friend of his doing vocals and chants. It's done various amount of guest spots, so one of them being guitars for track 8 on Behemoth's Demigod. Who else? George Callis, who's still the drummer today. Done stuff for him. Nada Sadek, Morbid Angel on Heretic. Scarab, which is a death metal band from Egypt, who I have seen Bloodstock one year, and really, really good stuff right there. And as Wolfheart, another band that I really like as well. So he's done guest stuff for various amounts of bands. And it's cool that he's got that they added the chant elements as well as other elements that make it just dark and just heavy. Then we got Wes Ben Scooter. I think I said that wrong now. I might butcher his last name. Obviously, I think I've mentioned him before, doing Amorphous, Black Winter Day, cover art, as well as more as Autopsy for Macabre Eternal, Tourniquets, Hacksaws, and Graves, Skull Crusher, and so on and so forth, as well as the last album, Ashes, Organs, Blood, and Crypts, Black Sabbath, the Dio Years compilation artwork, Bloodbath, Nightmares Made Flesh, Broken Hope, Cattle Decapitation, Savalic Carnage, Crypta, Deceased, Dio, Fulci, their new album, Hooded Menace, Hyperdontia, Hypocrisy, Incantation, Creator, Massacre, Mortician, Nile, Regurgitate, list goes on, Sinister, Slayer, Vader, list goes on. Adam Peterson was in a band called Die Fury, and as well as done layouts and designs for various bands, one of them being Agoraphobic Nosebleed, Amorphis, Bonzilla, Of course, Nile. Embalmer. Uh, who else that people know? Incantation, I've mentioned already. Mortician for their Zombie Apocalypse EP, which a lot of people, which someone said is an album, is an EP. Soylent Green, Solstice, countless other bands as well. And then on to Dave, who did the mastering for not only Nile, but Abhorrence, who is not the finished band, one from Brazil. I've got a foot Nosebleed, Amorphis, Bonzilla, Brutal Truth, Savannah Carnage, Deceased, Disembowelment, of course, the legendary death doom metal band from Australia, Flotsam and Jetson, Incantation, Mortician, Mastodon, Nasm. Of course, not this one. Regurgitate, Soylent Green, Vector, as well as others. So that's who's done mixing, producing, mastering, artwork, graphic arts, and guests. Now let's get on to the songs, half of which I am not going to be able to pronounce half of the names, but I will try my best for listing out the songs. So let's get on to the first one, which is an instrumental called Invocation of the Gates of At. I'm not going to try and say it, but it's a very long name. So it starts off the album, very atmospheric overtones right there, which then gets into the title of the album, Black Seeds of Vengeance, which when I heard that, I was just like, what a brutal technical in your face song. Dallas and Carl's vocals just dwelling very well together, as well as Chief doing vocals as well. So they all bounce off each other very well. Pete doing some vocals as well on the album. But obviously, Dallas and Carl just, because you get Carl doing like not very low growls like Carl does, because his are very low. But Dallas has the more somewhere in between, like getting into a scream, and so somewhere in between. And then we got Defiling the Grave of Ishtar. Again, carrying on that brutality. Very, very technical. All the guitars are very technical. The bass, the drumming's just insane. Obviously, Derek Roddy would have done a lot of the drumming on this album from tracks 1 to 9 and 11 and 12 and doing vocals on 12. And of course, Pete just doing drums for track number 10. And then we got the Black Flame. Once again, more of the same brutality and just the sheer amount of technicality within the song structure. And then we got Libation unto the shades who lurk in the shadows of the temple of Unra. I hope I said that right. Is an instrumental. So a bit more of a break with more of the chanting, atmospheric, ambient parts there. And then we get another one of my favorite songs on this album, as well as the title track, Masturbating the War God. Just one hell of a song title and just one hell of a song. Again, Cole and Dallas's vocals just bouncing off each other very well, as well as all of the instruments. And then we got Multitude of Foes. Fast in your face track right there, as well as chapter for transforming into a snake. Very, very much intense track right there, as well as this one, which is track number 9, which I'm just going to show you right here. Let me just get over here so then I can see what I'm looking at there. So track number 9. So I'm not going to try and pronounce half of these names, but again, a very dark, heavy track. And then that gets into the longest one, which is a bit more slowed down than everything else. To Dream of Your. That's the longest track on here, clocking in at 9 minutes, 7 seconds. Very, very much a I don't want to say mid tempo, but a bit of a more slower song, not like doom metal slow, but still a very, but much slower than everything else that you would have heard so far. And then we have The Nameless City of the Accused, another instrumental, one very much atmospheric track right there. And then we get the last one, which I'm not going to try and say, that's just track number 12, which is then doing that dark, evil chanting, which they ended with when I saw them here in Bristol, because obviously they ended with Black Seeds of Vengeance. And that's what ends the album. And what a great ending to an album that is. A very dark, heavy album. And just, man, when it comes to technical, brutal death metal, there are a lot of bands that I can name, but obviously I'm showing one of them now in this series. And these guys have done no wrong. Of course, one of my other favorite albums is Annihilation of the Wicked. And of course, we have Sacrifice unto Sebek, which is another one of my favorites. Obviously, not on this album, but still one of my favorites, as well as Lashed to the Slave Stick, which, of course, hearing that live and just along with all the stuff on this album as well. But this album here, definitely one that if you've not too familiar with it, you've not heard it yet, and you've been into Nile for I don't know how long now, or if you've been into Nile, but haven't got around to this yet. Which, if you haven't, definitely give this a well-deserved listen. Like I said, it is very technical, it's very brutal, it's very atmospheric, very dark sounding album. And like I said, Dallas and Cole's vocals just bounce off each other very well. Of course, Chief as well, his vocals and Pete's vocals get a mix of vocals, but of course, when you hear Dallas and Cole's vocals, you can tell whose vocals are who. Because, like I said, Cole's are very low. Dallas's are um merge, merging at not merging bridging to that point. Because you can when you hear Dallas do his vocals, you can make out what he's saying. With Cole, you can make out bits and pieces. But then again, Cole's vocals are solo or that low. They're just evil, very evil sounding vocals. And Dallas's as well. But Cole's just super deep, super low. And it adds to that heaviness of the music. Because obviously we go back to the previous releases, he didn't do vocals. He didn't do vocals on the demo. And I don't think he did. He started doing vocals on the first album, but for like the other releases, he didn't do any vocals until much later when you hear him on the debut and also this and so on. Because I think a lot of people who got into Nile back in the day were probably thinking, well, when's Carl going to do any vocals? Those who would know the guys personally. And then you hear him do vocals like, okay, where the hell did that come from? But I think his vocals on here are just absolutely savagely evil. And adding Dallas onto that and them doing mad technical parts on this and as well as the other albums that they would have done together blend so well. Just a killer album, which if you're more onto the brutal technical side of death metal, and I do still love some of my technical brutal death, this will be an album for you as well as others I will be mentioning in this series from the early 2000s, soon to be moving on to the mid 2000s. And because I got, the next ones came out 2 years later. And, you know, technical, brutal death metal stuff, technical, brutal death metal bands just know how to step it up the next level. Because obviously, with a lot of the earlier bands, a lot of them weren't technical, but some were doing technical element, like doing technical guitar riffs. And then obviously a lot of other bands throughout the decades started, you know, taking it a step further. Of course, there's so many of them, but Nile's just one of many that have done that. And they're still one of my favorites today because they still know how to keep that strong and keep it going. And I'm always going to love a band like Nile. But like I've said, I like more of my old school death metal. But then I will go back to something like this, and I'm glad I went back to it because it still holds up 24 years later. And what's this going to be like in 30 years? I think it'll still hold up 30 years later. Definitely. So more people are into your technical, brutal death metal. This is more up your alley. If you're not into that, then it's not going to be for you. But then obviously there's going to be people here in the metal scene that will give it a go, and if it's not for them, it's not for them. Not for them at all. Because after a while, I just didn't bother listening to a lot of tech death, a lot of brutal death, a lot of slam death, because I'm more into the old school sound, be it bands from back in the day or newer bands doing that old school sound. And then when I go back to something like this, I'm like, yeah, I love this stuff for all the reasons that I've said and for my overall conclusions. Of course, the all important word, heavy. It's technical, it's brutal, it's well mixed, well mastered, well produced by Carl himself. Everything just blends so well together. All the chanting, all the atmospheric ambient parts. I mentioned Alice and Carl's vocals bouncing off each other very well. All of them did so well on their respective instruments. Everything on this is just, to me, perfection. And that all important word that is just, you know, in pretty much in bold writing, but you can't see it, but obviously big bold writing, a timeless masterpiece. An absolute timeless masterpiece for pretty much all the reasons I've said, and albums I've said before, like I've said in all these videos, albums that I've said before are timeless masterpieces. Ones after this one, and future albums that I will be talking about in future episodes will be timeless masterpieces to me and hopefully to you watching out there as well. But definitely one for those who love brutal, technical death metal, more on the techier side, the more brutal side of death metal. You love that more. And probably are bands who have heard this and thought, yeah, got that influence, as well as the next band that I will be talking about in the next episode next week. And yeah, cracking album, awesome band. Yeah, awesome band, awesome album. Just so much perfection here. 24 years of brutality right here. 24 years. Who would people like would have whoever heard this like back in the day? They're probably thinking, what's it going to be like 20, 25, like 20, 24 years or whatever, how many years down the line? And then a lot of them probably thinking, yeah, it still holds up, and yeah, it still holds up. And of course, they were on this label at the time, and Relapse always knew how to release good stuff, and this is one of many. And these guys are now currently on a different label, Napalm Records. But at the time, releasing sick stuff like this on Relapse Records, which of course is still going today, But back to this album, heavy, brutal, dark, and a timeless masterpiece, which a lot of people should hear if you are that much more of a fan of technical, brutal, death, metal, that technical, brutal sound. So once again, this is Nile and Black Seeds of Vengeance. Killer album, awesome band. And that's it for another episode of my Metal Vault. I hope you enjoyed this one. Like I said, I got much more here. And just ticking that off while trying to adjust my laptop and not trying to hit my microphone off the table. But yeah, I got five more on no, six more on here on this list to do. And the next one, if you've looked at my community post, is another band that I've been into for quite a long time. One of my favorites, because I've mentioned Behemoth, and they're one of my favorite bands from Poland. Well, this one is from Poland, along with another band that I mentioned on here when talking about all the people that have worked on different bands, on different albums. Vader, another excellent band from Poland. But you're going to know this one as soon as you see their name, as soon as you hear their name and see that album. And then, of course, after that, a band from Sweden, then Finland, then America. And then the last two for on this page are both from Birmingham, England, here in the UK. And you're going to know who they are as soon as you hear the names and see the albums. But anyway, don't forget to like this video, share it around, and comment down below about, like, if you heard this album back in the day, what was your overall view on it? Or just say it's a really cool album, really well done, a really well done album. Whatever it is you want to comment down below, comment down below. And most importantly, don't forget to subscribe to keep up to date with everything that's going on this series, on my channel, and just everything that's going on my channel. And much more to come here. So thank you very much for tuning in. I've been Jacob Jake's Metal Chat. Keep that banner of metal well and truly high. And I will see you all again in another episode of my Metal Vault.